Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our second Facebook Live Town Hall this week. We got a lot of really good feedback the other day, over 6,000 comments, 15,000 watches, I believe, reaching all corners of the district, which is extremely hard to do. So tonight we're going to have a mixture. We spent a lot of time today pulling a lot of questions that were asked last Monday that we weren't able to get to, and we also have a mix of some of Indivisible Charlottesville's questions that they put out for their members to ask today. We figured we'd go ahead right off the bat, hit a few of those, and get rolling.
Also, want to thank everybody for tuning in. I'm incredibly proud of what we were able to do on Monday, reaching over 15,000 independent logins on the Townhall Hall, speaking to literally residents of every single locality in the district. That's something I would wager that we've spoken with more constituents this year than any other member of Congress, and taking questions, and maybe somebody can demonstrate otherwise, but I doubt it. Alongside that, we've also had about 14 stops in district, met with a good group of students from the Blue Ridge School today, and just really, really excited about having the opportunity to reach out, answer your questions. Also wanted to point out that if you want to get a question in via telephone, 202-225-4711. We'll probably only be able to get to a handful of those, as we've already taken a good number of questions from a list on the internet, as well as cold questions from Monday, and in fact told some specific individuals that we will answer their questions. So I guess, Andrew, you know who those folks are.
Yes, sir.
So I'm ready to go. If you're ready to go, I genuinely thank everybody for being here, and look forward to doing this for a little bit more select audience here again in the very near future.
All right. So the first question is coming from Indivisible Charlottesville, and it is: as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, what actions do you plan to take in regard to the serious allegations and apparent cover-up of Michael Flynn's pre-inauguration communication with Moscow?
So I absolutely support an investigation of any wrongdoing by General Flynn. I think the investigation should be three-pronged. Number one, did Flynn do anything wrong that he was aware of, that those lawyers out there will understand the sort of mens rea element of that? Number two, was he instructed, and if so, by whom? And number three, who is responsible for what would appear to be multitudinous links inside the American intelligence community, who's responsible for protecting our nation? All three of those things are relevant, and I think important moving forward. It actually won't be the purview of the Foreign Affairs Committee. That's probably going to fall under the Office of Government Reform and Oversight. So, but we are supportive of an investigation into who knew what, when, what was done with intent, and if it was directed.
The second question is also pulled verbatim from Indivisible Charlottesville, and that has to do with: as a member of the Education and Workforce Committee, how do you plan to protect the right to quality education for low-income, special education, and minority students in Virginia's 5th District?
Right. So the best way to judge future performance is by past performance. And we're incredibly proud of what we were able to do on the subject of education in the Virginia Senate. There's a track record. There's video. There's, again, we talked about this on Monday. There's me actually championing education opportunities for young people in the small handful of failing schools that we have in Virginia. We're blessed in the 5th Congressional District in that we have very good schools by and large. I said the same thing Monday night because it's true. We're blessed in Virginia because our schools during my tenure in the Virginia Senate ranked between 4th and 6th in the nation, depending upon the metrics that you use. I would argue that we should not be rating our schools versus 49 other states in the District of Columbia, but instead in the global sphere. And so until we're number one in the nation and competing against the likes of Western European countries, Asian countries, where we're being beaten academically in some measures, we shouldn't ever think we're doing good enough. But the real focus, the real ultimate challenge for us is to ensure that children in a fraction of failing schools have the opportunity to be placed into an environment where they can succeed. There are two fundamental rights, I would argue, by virtue of being an American. Number one, that you have an opportunity, We say this again and again and again. Everyone's entitled to an opportunity. There is no sustainability to communities wherein individuals don't have opportunity. But the opportunity is spread unequally all too often by zip code. And the impacts are disparate all too often on lower socioeconomic classes and all too often on minority students. We had this fight in the Virginia Senate when one party came forward with a plan that pulled out 5 or 6 failing schools out of hundreds and hundreds of schools statewide and said these children aren't failing these schools are failing these children, we need to do something differently. And we fought to ensure that there were educational alternatives for the parents of the young people who were trapped by zip code and by a parent who loved their children no differently than anyone else, but didn't have the wherewithal to move with their feet to somewhere else. So we will always fight to ensure that the educational opportunity present, particularly for children who face unique socioeconomic challenges, particularly for children who are born into single-parent households, who are born into households where the traditional educational attainment hasn't mirrored that in other areas, is there. Because I believe, as I said again Monday, that if you have the argument between nature and nurture, nurture wins out. You take a young person, regardless of their skin color, regardless of their religion or their ethnic background, and you place them somewhere where the conditions are right for success, and you encourage them, and you provide good role models for them, and you will have successful children. And so we fought for that in the state level, and we will continue to fight for it at the federal level. The solution cannot simply be one of increasing per pupil expenditures. We need to look at where the paradigms are broken and we're not achieving success. We need to look at schools where young people are going to colleges in the single-digit percentiles as opposed to near 100%, or technical education. And so what frustrated me the most as a member of the Senate who was advocating for school choice, for reform, for opportunities for the most disadvantaged young people in our communities was when the other side would say, well, something needs to be done, but this isn't it. Well, that's a recipe for the status quo, and the status quo is failing those people who are most at risk. We need to change the paradigm. I'll continue to fight to change that paradigm, and the brunt of my fight will be targeted on helping young people who aren't as fortunate as others by virtue of where they're born or the circumstances of their birth.
The next question is also verbatim from Indivisible Charlottesville. Flynn's resignation has added to the growing concerns Americans have about the credibility of the current administration. Will you commit to calling out ethical violations and misrepresentation of facts by your own party?
Absolutely, and I have in the past. Again, if you look at who challenged the Senate Majority Leader, who was the only person to publicly come forward and challenge the Senate Majority Leader after a series of foibles and mistakes that he made, you'll find that it was me. If you look at the only Republican to come out publicly and challenge the Virginia Senate Majority Leader when I was a member of the majority in the Virginia Senate as to his draconian ban of the Fourth Estate, the media from the floor in the Virginia Senate chamber, the only person to do that publicly who was on my side of the aisle was me. And where I see this administration do things where I think they've gone awry, where I think they've overstepped the bounds of their office, where I think they've acted in a manner that's not consistent with the Constitution, you can look forward to me pointing it out. I had, I think, spoken to this Monday as well. There was an incredible overreach by the previous administration as it relates to the actual responsibilities put out in the Constitution for the executive branch in Article 2. The Oxford Dictionary says that a law is a rule made by government wherein the government has the ability to take someone's life, liberty, or property by virtue of them violating that law. And yet, Article 1 of the Constitution says that lawmaking power is vested solely in the legislative branch. However, executive entities under the Obama administration, who bragged that he had a pen and a telephone, promulgated regulations that had the effect of law and essentially usurped the power of the legislative branch. So in the first 45 or so days that we've been here in Washington, we've rolled back those executive branch overreaches and reclaimed the power that rightfully belongs to the legislative branch. And we're going to continue to understand the Constitution, the roles of each branch under the Constitution, and fight to uphold the Constitution. Now, those might be under circumstances that other people might not find to their ideological ilk, but Article 1 is plain as to who's responsible for making laws, and Article 2 is plain for as to who's responsible for enforcing laws, and those aren't things we can argue. The Constitution is pretty darn clear.
Okay, another question directly from Indivisible Charlottesville. The president has referred to judges as so-called courts and political. Do you believe in an independent judiciary, and will you commit to condemning any executive actions that imperil the constitutional protections provided by checks and balances?
Absolutely. But President Trump's so-called judge's comment mirrors comments made by President Obama as it related to a certain campaign finance ruling, mirrors comments made by President Obama as it related to a certain immigration judge, mirrors comments critical of the judiciary made by President Obama as it related to a particular State of the Union address where one justice present actually mouthed the words "not true" during the address. In fact, there's a long history of presidents condemning the judiciary branch when they think they acted wrongly. Franklin Delano Roosevelt condemned the Supreme Court when they failed to enact certain planks in his New Deal. Abraham Lincoln absolutely, positively, rightly condemned the ruling in the Dred Scott decision. And so, whereas we might agree or disagree with the rulings of particular judges, and I can think of some rulings as an attorney that I think were not proper, and whereas we should respect the role of each branch, criticism is not something that is prohibited, and judges are not human entities who've perfected life here on earth. They too are fallible, as cases like Dred Scott tell us. So in a country where the documents upon which we were founded were close to perfect, but the people who implemented them were far away from perfect, we've had to have some bad court rulings to get to a closer thing to what the founders' words meant. And so it's okay. I have no problem with President Obama criticizing the court. Likewise, I have no problem with President Trump criticizing the court. Likewise, I have no problem with Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln, in particular in the Dred Scott ruling, criticizing the court. It would be a circumstance wherein the executive branch acted to usurp the power of the court that we would have a problem, and I can assure you that you would hear us act loudly and swiftly.
Okay, we have another question from Indivisible Charlottesville, read again verbatim. You have vowed to protect U.S. from its enemies, yet countless members of our armed services have said that the President's executive order on immigration makes our country less safe. Why do you continue to support it?
So, the last I looked, the projections for military vote between Mr. Trump and Ms. Clinton had him winning by roughly 20%. The military personnel with whom I've spoken, to include General Kelly from Homeland Security, have not said that. I haven't heard that from any members of our military. Further, today I had the opportunity to sit down with several members in the Homeland Department who said that the people for whom or with whom they work are heartened. So I'm not sure where the facts underlying the question come from. Let me tell you what makes America less safe. What makes America less safe is the mischaracterization of temporary restrictions on travel as a Muslim ban when it is anything but that. The 7 nations included on Mr. Trump's list were drafted by some of the individuals with whom I spoke today under the previous administration, approved under the previous Congress, and they were drafted because there were no entities inside those failed nation states with whom we could check to ensure the background of the individuals who sought to come here, which led FBI Director James Comey and the Director of Homeland Security to each say, we cannot adequately vet. Now, the rhetoric that's followed has said, oh, the Muslim ban infuriates our enemies and is used by ISIS as a recruiting tool. Okay, let's look at the numbers. These 7 nations represent roughly 11% of the Muslim population worldwide. They represent 7 of over 50 majority Muslim nations on the planet, and it's not a Muslim ban because at least up until 2016, there were literally millions of Christians still living in Syria and Iraq, although the numbers had been cut in half by reckless foreign policy, a policy of leading from behind, an Arab Spring, and leaving Iraq in a power vacuum. So it applies evenly to all individuals from these nations, regardless of their faith, and these nations house literally millions of people who aren't Muslims. So, if indeed the term Muslim ban is a recruiting tool for our enemies, and as a recruiting tool for our enemies, it makes our citizens less safe abroad and at home, then why do people on the other side of the aisle continue to perpetuate the lie that there's a Muslim ban? If indeed people on the other side of the aisle believe these things make Americans less safe, and if indeed Senator Arthur Vandenberg was right in 1947 when he cast aside the potential win over Harry Truman in the presidential race, saying politics should stop at the water's edge, why do some people create a circumstance that's not true to further a political agenda that by their own reckoning will endanger Americans? That's a rhetorical question. I can't answer it. But the individuals in the military who voted, the individuals in the military with whom I've spoken, and the individuals who are professionals in the Department of Homeland Security and other apparatus serving in that arena with whom I've spoken say that the measure is prudent, and that is why we continue to support it.
Okay, so now we're going to move into questions that were asked on Monday. With over 6,200 comments during our last Facebook Live Town Hall, we obviously couldn't get to all those. So we did a good job going through pretty much all the most critical or verbally outspoken against some of the President or Congressman Garrett's policies or initiatives. So the first question I'm going to kick off, it's two different constituents that essentially asked the same thing. I spoke with Craig Dubose today at length. Really nice guy, very concerned about a host of issues, one of them being ACA. And again, these questions are all in verbatim as they were asked on our comment thread on Monday. So Craig Dubose says, please explain the wisdom of getting rid of the ACA immediately without a suitable replacement. Remember Trump's promise that there would be better health care for all. With the difficulty, there's certain to be in Congress formulating a workable plan. Why should we believe that a new plan will be forthcoming at all, let alone in a timely manner? What's the rationale for getting rid of the ACA without a replacement in place? And I also want to address Rebecca Trexler, who said, given you want to repeal the Affordable Care Act and replace it with, well, something, please describe in bullet points exactly what this replacement would have in order for you to support it.
One of the things I'm amazingly proud of is the fact that this process has been as deliberate as it has. If you think back to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, we had the majority party leader imploring us to, quote, pass the bill so that we could find out what was in it. If we'd taken the time to find out what was in it, we might not have a bill that had failed so miserably. And so today I was happy to join with Congressman Mark Stanford, Senator Rand Paul, when we rolled out the Paul Sanford replacement plan, which is available, the entire press conference on Facebook, on this page, I believe. If it's not, it will be soon. Andrew's nodding. And so that becomes the second actual articulated plan that would be a replacement plan. To the extent that you want the bullet points, they're here. I hate to read to you. Legalize affordable insurance programs, expand access and scope of health savings accounts, equal tax relief for individuals and health insurance purchasers, allow individuals and groups to band together to purchase insurance. Most of these things aren't rocket science. I actually spoke at the press conference today and outlined a portion of the plan that I'm very proud of because I'll take some credit for it being in there. And that is something we spoke again about on Monday, the McCarran-Ferguson antitrust repeal. A lot of free market advocates talk about being able to insurance shop across state lines, but in reality it's awfully hard to do because of the antitrust exemption that exists for the insurance industry. I want you to think about this. That really mirrors that which we have for professional football or baseball. With professional football, professional baseball, we recognize that there's a finite talent pool and there are a finite number of marketplaces with enough population or demand to satisfy the marketplace, and so the federal government allows restrictions on competition and constrictions on markets to ensure that the product delivered is a quality product. If anyone could articulate to me how professional baseball and purchasing health insurance are somehow parallel, I'd love to hear it. We have similar limitations on health insurance providers in each state that deny the real ability to shop across state lines, and that's why we need to repeal McCarran-Ferguson. When we spoke today, I read two quotes, and I apologize again for reading to you, but I think these are worthwhile. The first is, and I quote, "At its core, health reform is about ensuring that every American family and business have more choices, benefit from more competition, and have greater control over their own health care." The second quote is, "It's time for Washington to determine whether we stand with patients or profiteers, whether we believe in market competition or collusion between politicians and insurance monopolies." Both of these quotes were made in 2010. Both of these quotes were made in support of the repeal of the McCarran-Ferguson healthcare antitrust exemption. The first quote was from Obama spokesman Robert Gibbs in articulating the president's strong support for McCarran-Ferguson repeal. The second quote was from then Congressman Tom Perriello. So where we might not always agree on anything, I do think it's noteworthy that in formulating this replacement plan, which would be implemented simultaneous to repeal, we've included ideas from across the ideological spectrum because no party has a monopoly on good ideas. and we should always be willing to listen to people who we might not agree with. Sooner or later, we might find out they have something that we'd like to share. And so, again, there's two plans now. There's the Collins plan on the Senate side, the Paul Sanford plan. We'll have notes out on those later, but if you Google search Rand Paul, Mark Sanford, you will find all the details you could ever want. I will say this, not everything we want is in those replacement plans. The current formulation in the Paul Sanford plan says that if you have a pre-existing condition and you maintain your health insurance for 2 years, you will not be able to be terminated from your health insurance. The argument that they make is that you can't buy fire insurance for your house once your house is on fire. There should be some incentive to maintain insurance. While I don't disagree with the argument, the number of Americans with pre-existing conditions in need of care is such that we need to have some apparatus to catch those people who, through no fault of their own, fall through the cracks. So what we've proposed is, with the removal of the individual mandate, a replacement with a provider incentive. And what this would do is it would take the insurance companies who are already in the business of providing insurance. It would say it is a national priority that we ensure that people in high-risk pools, people with pre-existing conditions, maintain insurance coverage. And to that end, insurance providers, you will insure these individuals to the tune of a number not greater than your total federal tax burden. When they demonstrate that they have provided this product at their expense, not a mandate on individual taxpayers, to a certain level each year, we will determine what percentage of federal taxes that they would have paid are returned in favor of them covering those who might have pre-existing conditions and being able to cover themselves. It's a carrot instead of a stick. It's placed on the industry instead of the individual, and it's the closest thing to free markets that I think you could possibly find, where we can ensure that individuals who find themselves falling through that proverbial safety net are caught by a nation benevolent and caring enough to do just that.
Okay, next question came in from Rebecca Newman. She said, as a former member of our military, what specific plans do you have to support our troops after they return from service?
Well, I was honored after the tragedy in the family of my former Senate colleague, Cree Deeds, to be named the chairman of the Mental Health Subcommittee of the Education and Health Committee in the Virginia Senate. There are amazing and complex needs faced by the women and men who've served in uniform in this nation, a lot of whom I count not just as my colleagues and my comrades, but as my friends. Mental health is among these. The Congress last year was able to pass for the first time a comprehensive mental health reform bill patroned by a Republican from Georgia, signed into law by President Obama. That's a good start, but it doesn't close the gap. We need to also look into how the VA operates, ensure that the VA is efficient and that we take advantage of redundancies in coverage where a VA facility might exist in close proximity to a research hospital where they're each working on the same sort of things, traumatic brain injury, etc. We've actually got a bill in right now to the Legislative Services that would create a pool of money to help make whole individuals who suffered from combat-related sexual mutilations. These are young men most times who might have lost a limb and maybe at age 25, newly married, lost the ability to become heads of households, and they number well over 1,000. And we shouldn't forget about these young men who are no longer whole. We hope to roll that bill out as soon as we can. In my personal time, I've done work promoting a group called Homes for Our Troops. They just recently built a beautiful home in the Crozet area for Marine Kevin Blanchard and his lovely bride. Let's see. There are just so many things and complexities here. And truly, of all the groups of individuals and citizens who we owe a debt of gratitude to, it's those who are courageous enough, who are brave enough to walk out into those hostile crowds with an American military uniform on and stand for freedom and stand for justice and for protecting lives, not just of our own citizens, but of people around the world. I'm honored to have been one of those people, but I'm more honored to serve them. So there's any number of areas where we're working, but VA reform, mental health reform, continuing to research TBIs and amputees needs, even beyond the traditional purview that one might consider are all on the list, and that's something we take very dearly.
Okay, for anyone who may have joined us recently, we kicked off the night by addressing a lot of specific questions verbatim from Indivisible Charlottesville. At the sake of being redundant, we may end up hitting on a couple of issues twice if constituents have still asked them, in lieu of the fact that they may have come in late. So this is one we hit on earlier, but Steve Light wants to know Tom's statement about Flynn and if the Foreign Affairs Committee will investigate. Kat Mayberry asked the same thing with regard to whether the Foreign Affairs Committee would look into the apparent cover-up of Michael Flynn's pre-inauguration communication, and we have a host of other people that wrote in on that same issue.
So we've already asked if Foreign Affairs would be the appropriate purview for that investigation and been told no. But I do support an investigation. Again, I outlined earlier, there are three things we need to know. Did Mr. or General Flynn do something that he knew to be illegal with intent? If he did do so, was he instructed to do so, and if so, by whom? And also, where the multitudinous leaks in our national security apparatus that by virtue of its very mission can't leak and also do its job came from. So it would not be the Foreign Affairs Committee jurisdiction based on what I've been told, and we again have asked several individuals over the course of the last couple of days, but we do support the investigation.
Okay.
And if we can get some phone calls too,
we'll work on them. We'll have them coming in. Jennifer Ludovici, during Monday night's discussion, when we spoke on Congressman Garrett's stance on Syria, Jennifer wrote in, Assad is using chemical weapons on his own people. Anything less than total condemnation of him is a cop-out. Watching you defend him is as productive, but maybe unsavory leader as he is appalling. So,
right, so, okay. What am I supposed to do? Entirely condemn Assad? I completely and totally condemn Assad. There's no justification for atrocities committed by the Assad regime. Okay. Now, the last time we invaded a nation based on alleged use of chemical weapons on their own people, it was Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Here's what we've espoused, and I want to articulate this clearly because I'm proud of it, and it's something I've worked on across party lines, and that is that, number one, we should never send the first soldier, sailor, airman, or marine. We should never fire the first bullet, drop the first bomb, or launch the first missile until our executive branch, our commander-in-chief, can tell us what the desired status quo is following the execution of military action and how it is better than the current status quo. That's number one. Number two, we should never send arms or money to anyone who might turn them on the United States or its allies when they're done using them in the current conflict. These are pretty simple suggestions. Now, the political reality in Syria is as follows. The Kurds in the north have been successful and good allies, not only in Syria, but also in Iraq. But the Kurdish military forces have displayed no interest in working beyond traditional Kurdish-controlled areas. That is, they'll liberate areas that are Kurdish in nature and hold them, but they won't advance on enemy strongholds. That's the closest thing to a viable, stable regime that exists in Syria. Unfortunately, they have no interest in ruling Syria, but only the northernmost parts thereof. The next elements that we get to are Jabhat al-Nusra, Jabhat al-Fatah al-Sham, which are both now co-opted into what we know is Al-Qaeda and ISIS and the Assad regime. Now, what else do we know? We know that since the last administration encouraged the Arab Spring and uprisings across North Africa and the Middle East, that multiple vacuums were created. The paradigm that's easiest to look to, aside from U.S. failures in Iraq, are the shortcomings in Libya. No one would argue that Muammar Gaddafi was anything other than a brazen, murderous tyrant. However, his people were far safer before he was deposed than after. The reality is that Libya was ruled by a strongman who imprisoned his own people, and when he was faced with military threats from the outside, did engage in killing who he perceived to be his enemies. But the death toll under his watch was nothing compared to the staggering instability and death toll that continues there to this very day, to the point where entire minority groups are being exterminated. It's genocide. Now, in Syria, we know that Assad is horrible, but there's no viable alternative, and what we know is that from 1971 until 2011, under Bashar Assad and Hafez Assad, there was relative stability. Syrian women actually achieved educational attainment at a rate higher than men. They had the right to vote and as close to equal rights as any country in the region not named Israel. Assad had removed troops from southern Lebanon and had had stability and no conflict with his neighbors for a generation. And yet, after the Arab Spring uprising, we've seen at least 500,000 killed, yes, by Assad, but also by others, and at least 5 million people displaced. In fact, the temporary travel restrictions were implemented because of the instability that was created by the United States' failure to act prudently on the front end of the situation. So if we want to, because let me tell you something, one thing that displaced people have in common is that they don't want to be displaced. So what we're arguing in favor of is peace and stability. There was an election in Syria in 2014, and Assad won by a relatively significant margin. They empowered individuals of Syrian descent, even overseas, to vote. So we were able to at least monitor the votes of Syrian Americans. They empowered Syrian Lebanese to vote. Am I suggesting that this election was perfect? No. But I am suggesting that before we had the bloodshed, the mass displacement on a scale not seen since World War II, 500,000 murdered by at least 5 different factions, we had peace and stability. And our priority should be on peace and stability. That's not an extreme right-wing message or an extreme left-wing message. That's a human message with the values where our values should be. Number one, the United States should not engage militarily where our chief executive cannot articulate a status quo after that is in some way better than the status quo prior. And right now, there are no conceivable replacements for Assad. And number two, we shouldn't arm or fund individuals who may next turn their weapons or resources against ourselves or our allies. Very simple demands, in no way, shape, or form demanding us or defending Assad. Candidly, I would like to see a circumstance where Assad agreed to free and fair elections. We've joined with Tulsi Gabbard in a bill that will prevent the funding of terrorist groups. We've added Hezbollah to that group in our own bill because that's a group that had previously been affiliated with Assad. But what we're working for here is peace and stability, laudable goals.
And I just want to follow up on that briefly. We got a couple questions in on Monday as well that were asking if you would support boots on the ground in Syria.
Open source information from overseas indicates that we might already have individuals on the ground in Syria as it relates to aiding and targeting and training. To the extent that special forces operators are necessary as it relates to engaging the most extreme elements in that conflict, and specifically ISIS and what were formerly known as moderate Muslim armies, who are actually more affiliated at this point, again, with Al-Qaeda. I think the special forces operators are already there. If this is a question about sending in an armored division, sending in regular Army, regular Marines, I would oppose it vociferously. We have not yet met with the criteria that I just outlined. If we're going to engage, we need to be able to have the president look us in the eyes, whether his last name is Trump or Obama, and say, this is the end state that we seek that's better than the status quo. Having said that, if we can stop the fighting and we can engage in a diplomatic process to allow the Syrian people of all ethnicities, all religious groups, all regions of the nation to engage in a discourse to determine who they would like their leader to be, then we can stop the persons being displaced from their homes, and we can stop the massive, massive bloodshed that didn't exist before the Arab Spring in 2011.
Okay, next question that came in on Monday night in our thread was from Heather Mytelka. Renewable energy has incredible potential for creating technical jobs. Will you support job growth through increased wind and solar energy? Absolutely.
So here's the sticky wicket with renewables, and if you speak to anybody who's in the industry, they'll tell you. Wind and solar, even hydro projects, depending upon how we do them, we certainly don't want to destroy the character of our waterways. But I'm talking about harnessing the power of tides. Those sorts of things are amazing, and they hold great potential. However, right now we lack the storage capacity to convert our electrical grid to renewables. Because we don't have essentially battery capabilities that are sufficient to store the solar energy for long in scale for long enough periods of time that we have energy when the sun's not shining, nor do we have batteries that are capable of storing the wind energy for long enough times when the wind's not blowing. So what we need to do is ensure that we take an all-of-the-above approach to energy options. We need to look in to continuing to ensure that we have a viable coal industry, but that we also work towards clean coal, projects like coal gasification, etc., while we slowly wean ourselves off carbon-emitting energy-producing processes. But the reality is now, and anyone inside the industry will tell you, that we do not have the storage capability to wean ourselves entirely from traditional carbon-emitting fuel processes. Having said that, we recognize that other nations in the world continue to use these dirtier power methods. What we also cannot do is punish American manufacturers and job creators, small businesses and homeowners, by creating circumstances where we have an energy cost that's artificially high based on a reality technologically that hasn't yet arrived. So you can't separate your environmental policy from your economic policy. It has to be sort of a marrying of the equities and a balancing of priorities. But we should, by all means, continue to work towards producing the storage capacity necessary to create permanent, sustainable, non-carbon emitting fuels. We're simply just not there yet.
For anyone joining us late, we've been reading questions verbatim all night from either Indivisible Charlottesville or comments that came in on Monday night's thread. We had over 6,200 comments, so we're still working through all of them. Next question that came in on Monday night was from Diana Mead. She said, "No offense, but your social security scheme for students postponing their benefits is just another way to kill the program. There are much better ways to keep the system healthy." More of a comment than a question, but if you want to weigh in again on Social Security itself and student security plan.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the no offense. I really do. I disagree because our student security plan doesn't make anyone do anything. If you want to keep Social Security for yourself exactly as it exists today, then do. And we wouldn't change the plan one iota. It would only change the plan for individuals who, by their own choice, decided to opt out of some period of Social Security benefits in exchange for debt forgiveness for student loans. So it doesn't change one iota of Social Security as we know it, except it makes it sustainable forever by virtue of the estimates of how many people would take it up on the offer to essentially get paid on the front end instead of in the back end. What galls me is, number one, we have a student loan debt crisis because the federal government co-opted the student loan industry to ensure that any person can receive any money for any length of time to study anything without concern for the actuarial ability to pay the loans back. That's a federal government started problem, but it's a real problem. And Bernie Sanders was correct. And I agree, we're losing out on the fruits of the genius of an entire generation as young people find themselves burdened under a dark cloud of student loan debt. They can't buy cars, they can't buy homes. In the words of Mrs. Clinton, they can't move out of their mom's basement. And worst of all, they can't get loans to start up small businesses. The real engine of the American economy is small business, and the real engine of small business is ideas. And these young people have just as good, or in many cases better, ideas than preceding generations, and yet they're not allowed to exploit those ideas and create jobs and opportunity because they've been saddled by a student loan debt. So what this does is allows them the opportunity to make a choice. If they'd like to get out from underneath that student loan debt, they can retire debt to the tune of about $600 per month that they forego Social Security benefits for a maximum period of time, up to 10 years, for a maximum period recouped of up to, I believe, $100,000, $99,000 and change. And wow, think about the income that would be generated and pumped into our economy. Think about the ideas that would be unleashed, the homes that would be sold, the cars that would be bought and manufactured. Think about the freedom that people would have to start families and pursue their own dreams if they could get out from underneath of that cloud of student loan debt. But how do you do that in a nation that has $20 trillion worth of debt without starting a brand new program? And how do you keep the promises that we made to preceding generations? In Virginia, the chief problem that we face is how to fund the Virginia retirement system. Generally speaking, we're very well managed and we have budgets that balance, but the Virginia retirement system is not sustainable as it has been known over the years, and so there's been a fight over whether to change the promises that were made to people in the system or how to fund the system going forward. And I have always fallen on the side of keeping the promises we made yesterday and perhaps allowing for different promises tomorrow. That's what we do here. And that's what we're going to continue to do as we work to solve problems like ensuring that Social Security is viable for perpetuity and ensuring a way that young people can get out from the burdensome cloud of student loan debt. So I don't know why this, in fact, we expect that this should be a broadly supported bipartisan idea, just like McCarran-Ferguson has become under the 7-year-old leadership of folks like Betsy Markey and Tom Perriello and Robert Gibbs and Barack Obama. But it doesn't in any way, shape, or form take anyone's Social Security unless they choose to delay their receipt of Social Security. And no one's forcing them to do that, and those free choices are what makes America great and what's making us free.
Okay, Ethan Sachs asks, what is your favorite type of meat?
Wow. I read in a tweet that it was a cheeseburger. Somebody asked in one of the tweets if I didn't think I was about one cheeseburger away from being obese, and I had a cheeseburger for dinner, so I don't know, am I? My favorite type of meat, I love steak, I love chicken, I love fish. Probably the best meat that I've eaten in years was smallmouth bass that I caught while canoeing on the James River with my wife, which was cooked over a fire using nothing but salt and pepper and crushed red pepper. But I am a meat eater.
In the past couple minutes, we had 2 or 3 different people write in on gerrymandering. Laura Slack and Stephanie Hausman. I don't have the verbatim question. They were rolling through pretty quickly, but they both just wanted your stance on gerrymandering or made reference to this being a gerrymandered district.
Well, it is. There's no doubt that the 5th District's a gerrymandered district. I also wasn't in the General Assembly when it was drawn, and I'll tell you that I love every single square inch of it. The challenge really is for me, and that is how you get to know the needs of folks in Rappahannock and Fauquier County, and then contrast those with people in Lunenburg and Franklin and Henry County, and then again with folks in the center of the district in Albemarle and Charlottesville and Fluvanna County. So there's no doubt that it's gerrymandered. I am all in favor of geographical compactness and districts that have shared interest. We have a few problems. Number one, in fact, I've actually never voted for any redistricting map that was ever approved. So you can hate gerrymandering, and I'll join you. Number one, it's pretty hard to find 750,000 people in a swath of Virginia that's largely rural. When I speak with my colleagues and I ask them what's the largest city in your district, I'll hear, well, I got part of Chicago, or I've got a piece of Houston, or maybe we have suburban Atlanta or Minneapolis. Well, the largest city of the 5th District, is Charlottesville. So wonderful town, but not by any stretch of the imagination a large city. So the population density is one problem. The second problem are migration patterns in the Commonwealth. We know that people are moving from the south and west to the southeast and north, with that sort of central hub also growing around Richmond, forming what we call the urban crescent. And so drawing districts becomes a challenge that way as well. Ultimately, the 5th is right now the largest congressional district in Virginia. I can assure you after the 2020 census, it will not be. The 9th will be, because the 9th has to move east, because population will continue to shift. And what you'll have then in the 9th district is a district that's probably 6-7 hours from one end to the other, as opposed to the unwieldy 5.5 that we are. So these are real problems. Communities of interest are tough. I mean, the reality is that we had 70% margins in multiple localities and received, I think, 23% of the vote in the city of Charlottesville. So how do you find other communities within 50 or 75 miles of Charlottesville that vote like Charlottesville? The district's certainly gerrymandered. I love every single square inch of it. And I'd like to see better maps. My solution would not be a bipartisan districting panel or a nonpartisan districting panel. I'd like to see the parties come together and agree on criteria, define what communities of interest are, define geographical compactness, and then I'd like to see it fed into a computer. Because if you want to have real nonpartisan redistricting, then we have to agree on the criteria and then take the human element out of it. If you have nonpartisans who are appointed by partisans, I imagine you'll get a partisan outcome. So is the 5th District gerrymandered? Yes. Did I have anything to do with it? No. Do I love the whole darn district? Yes. Should we do it differently? I think we should look at it. I really do. Winston Churchill said democracy was the worst system of government in the world. except for all the others. If we can find a way that the parties can agree on criteria and then feed it into a machine, we might actually get some real nonpartisan districts that might create some more competitive races. But geographical reality and just the stark contrast in attitudes from one county to the next and the fifth make it hard to create something that's not as diverse as this district is.
All right. Let's see. I see Elizabeth Alcorn said, "Eat more red meat." Maybe you won't be around much longer. We always appreciate the constructive comments on this thread. Thank you for weighing in, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I'll cook you a steak sometime.
Kim Raines just read in the past 2 or 3 minutes, in what sorts of ways would you disagree with the current administration or tend to break ties?
So, yeah, that's an awesome question. Some of the rollouts they've done with some of the policies that they've had make me scratch my head and wonder if they tried to figure out the worst possible way to roll things out. I do not accept at face value had we taken more time to explain the travel restrictions, then people would have rushed in. I don't take that at face value. I think they should have absolutely stopped, and they should have said to the media and the American people, this is what the previous administration did. The previous administration let under 60 Syrians in 2011, under 80 Syrians in 2012 during the height of the bloodshed. And these are how we selected the nations, and this is why we selected the nations. So, it's almost a comedy of errors as it relates to some of the policy rollouts. One of the things I respect about President Trump, and I'm sure many of you will take exception, and that's fine, that's what makes us Americans, is that he's decisive. Don't be so decisive that you do not actually analyze the outcomes of how you deliver the message you choose to deliver. So that's a very real criticism. It's the look before you leap sort of thing. Aside from that, candidly, I don't think he's gone beyond his constitutional purview at all. I'm excited to have a chief executive who recognizes what Article 1 means and what Article 2 means, and who's pledged to sign the bills that we've passed that restore legislative power to the legislative branch. That's neat to me as a constitutionalist. But yeah, some of these things, the way they were delivered, I mean, one of the things that I know is that the media is not my enemy. I might perceive that there's some bias one way or the other, but as long as people treat me like I'd want to be treated, and that's why we're delighted to answer anybody's questions and trying to make sure that we get questions from folks who we know just don't support us and never will. That's cool. I think the Trump administration's really made a mistake in sort of creating enemies where maybe they need not have them, but I hope that'll change over time. It's going to be good for our nation if it will, and it'll lead to a lot more harmony in our neighborhood soccer games on the weekends and at the Little League ballpark. I used to joke with people, and I still do, but it was probably more true during my time in the General Assembly. If I'm picking teams for the barbecue, I can assure you it's bipartisan. I had some wonderful friends on the other side of the aisle who I might go do rhetorical battle with, for hours on end on the floor, and then go back in the antechamber and ask about their wives and kids. So we need to get back to that and understand that the real differentiation, I think, between the two parties isn't what they want for America. It's because I think both want what they feel is best for the nation. It's the pathway from point A to point B, and then appreciate that we can disagree without being disagreeable.
We just got asked a question via call on your stance and position on LGBTQ rights.
I'm really proud of the fact that we carried the law in Virginia that repealed what was called the Crimes Against Nature statute. There was a bill in Virginia from, I think, from my ability to discern, about 1619 until July 1st, 2014, that prohibited any but the most traditional acts of intimacy amongst adults. And it prohibited any acts of intimacy amongst adults of the same gender. I read that bill. The repeal was originally carried by Democrat Patsy Ticer in 2006. It failed. I was the sole patron of that bill in 2014, and it passed unanimously. The fact that in 2006 People thought it was in any way, shape, or form the purview of the state government to tell consenting adults, not for pay, not in public, what they could and couldn't do in their bedrooms is beyond me. I do believe that individuals are entitled to believe what they wish about what's a sin and what's right and what's wrong. I don't believe that they're entitled to foist those values on someone else. And so we were proud to be the sole patron of the bill that repealed the Crimes Against Nature statute in Virginia. Even that name is offensive. And I think that the rights of individuals of the age of consent in private, not for pay, to determine what it is that they'd like to do is an absolute one and completely beyond the scope of government. So, I guess, as I said early in the phone call, past performance is probably the best indicator of future actions.
David McCormick just wrote in on this thread about 2 minutes ago, simply asking, what's your stance on the EPA, please?
My stance on the EPA? Well, I'm happy to see a lot of regulatory reform going on. I'm happy to see what I think is some regulatory overreach being stopped. I'm delighted that I can point to some real successes as it relates to environmental stewardship, whether it's the resurgence of striped bass, the success of planting oyster beds in the Chesapeake Bay, the blue crab population having rebounded, the prevalence now of the bald eagle. I think I spoke about this on Monday. My wife and I did a 52-mile canoe trip from the fountain in Lynchburg to Buckingham State Park, and on the river, not including roads and overpasses, saw 14 bald eagles and 3 people in the course of 3 days. So the E to P ratio was almost 5 to 1. So I'm a big advocate of environmental stewardship. The only problem that I have with the EPA is that, as I've said repeatedly on this call and on Monday, economic and environmental policy can't be conducted in a vacuum. They impact one another. We need to make sure that we're outstanding stewards and that we perpetuate a sustainable world for our posterity. But we also need to do so realizing that people have families to support, and we also recognize the stewardship inherent to particular individuals who work with our land. For example, it's in the farmer's best interest to ensure that the farmer's land is able to be cultivated year after year. The only other thing I would say is that I'm not sure, if you are a strict constitutionalist, whether the EPA should be a federal responsibility or whether or not it's best handled by the states. At this juncture, I would err on the side of allowing states to shape environmental policy with some degree of federal oversight if some state decided to go to the extremists off the deep end. But I'm not anti the mission of the EPA. I'm certainly anti some of the administration that's been conducted. And I also think that we might be more responsible and reactionary in a good way to our needs at the state level.
Okay, we just had a Trip right in on the comment thread saying UVA is up over Duke at the half. Giving everyone a quick update. Thank you for tuning in here. Moving on, we have Alex Keller, who's been relatively active on our social media outlets, voicing his concern with a host of issues. From Monday night, about 28 minutes in, we were speaking about marijuana policies, how it relates to areas of lower socioeconomic status. Alex specifically said non-uniform enforcement of minor crimes that sends young black men to jail is problematic.
It absolutely is. Is that a question? Or?
That's a statement, and he just went on to say, I support decriminalization and putting fewer people in prison so they can be productive members of society.
I agree. And one of the cases that I think is definitional for me as a prosecutor, and I had somebody comment, I'm going to get back to this question in a second. We talked about vigilance as it related to protecting our nation from threats externally, and somebody said, well, what do you do to protect women who are victims of domestic violence? Well, I probably sentenced perpetrators of domestic violence to a combined total of over 1,000 years in prison during my time as a prosecutor. So I'm pretty darn proud of that. But one of the defining moments in my career as a prosecutor was when we had 2 cases within about 6 or 7 months of each other where the facts were almost analogous, except one of the persons who was caught with a significant quantity of marijuana cash and a firearm was African American and one was Caucasian. And I got a great deal of support from members of the local elected class in favor of the young man who was Caucasian because he was well known and his family was well known in the community, including positive comments from an African American sheriff saying treat this young man well. And what I said to my chief deputy at the time was that if we treat him any differently than we treat the other young man, we shouldn't be in this job. Justice that is not blind is not justice. And ultimately, when they were both sentenced, the sentences were nearly equal. And I had a person come up to me some period of time later in the Food Lion supermarket and say thank you. And I did not know who this African-American gentleman was. And he said, you don't know who I am, but we were watching you, and thank you. Having said that, I will say on the record, and I think I said this Monday, alcohol has destroyed far many lives, far many families than marijuana. Having said that, I wouldn't espouse or advocate on behalf of marijuana use. But having said that, the federal government has abdicated its own responsibility when it chooses to enforce certain laws in certain states and not enforce them in others. There's absolutely no excuse, there's no reason that a young person under the same set of circumstances in Virginia could be subject to federal incarceration and be set free in Colorado. And so we need to have laws on the books that we're going to enforce, or we need to change the laws on the books. We've signed on as a co-patron to a bill that would remove marijuana from the Schedule I controlled substances list. That's the list of controlled substances that have, quote, no redeeming medical use. We worked as the Republican co-patron to 2 different medicinal marijuana initiatives in Virginia to Democrat Senator Dave Marsden, who I tip my hat to, and have spoken with the families of young people who have been helped beyond my ability to communicate by cannabinoid A extracts that reduce the number of intractable seizures they had, literally in some instances 100-fold. So it's a joke for the federal government to maintain on its list of substances with no redeeming medical use cannabinoids in their extracts. And the federal government should get out of the marijuana policing business altogether and let that responsibility fall to each of the individual states. I'm not advocating for legalization. I'm advocating for federal decriminalization to allow pharmacies to carry the cannabinoid products that we know help these young people with intractable seizures, amongst others who can be assisted by this product. As we talked about on Monday, I'm absolutely in favor of deregulation to the point where it would allow our farmers, particularly in economically depressed areas like Southside Virginia, to put hemp into their crop rotation. We are literally in the sweet spot geographically and climatologically as it relates to hemp cultivation. I think some of the things that are on the books might have made sense in some draconian era gone by, but right now we need to put our money where our mouths is, and where our mouths are, and what we know is there are redeeming uses, and that the world will not come screeching to a halt should we get the federal government out of the marijuana control business, and that states can make good decisions for themselves, and that candidly Colorado's done us all a great favor by giving us several years of head start to look at the impacts of their policy. In fact, this very subject came up today in the Education and Workforce Committee, and I had the ability to speak not just with some folks involved in the juvenile justice arena from Colorado, but also Jared Paulus, a Democrat member from Colorado Springs, and I hope that I was able to enlist his support as it relates to getting the federal government out of the enforcement arena and letting states make these decisions for themselves. Because right now, when we conduct justice differently than in one state federally than we do in another federally, then we don't have anything that we can legally or rightly call justice.
And to expand on that just a little bit, we had Holly Duke just write in the comment section. I apologize, this isn't verbatim, but you essentially asked, as we're talking about marijuana policy in areas of lower socioeconomic statuses, if we would be in favor of restoring voting rights. So leading into that, I'd like to also ask, for anyone that's not aware of it, there's been an issue at the state level this past year with Governor McAuliffe for restoring voting rights, and what's the difference between federal and state and expand?
Well, so right now your federal rights aren't, the states still have control over that. So the 10th Amendment still applies. But the good news is that for the vast bulk of marijuana offenses, unless you're in a high volume distribution circumstance, you don't lose your voting rights because it's a misdemeanor. I think that the restoration of voting rights should be on an individual basis where they're allowed to petition, and that there should be criteria established. Now, again, this is kind of like saying I don't support the Atlantic Coast Pipeline until and unless they look for ways to put the pipeline in communities that are actually interested in having it versus those that don't. Because the reason it's like this is not my job as a member of Congress. But But I think that we should have an individual ability to petition the court for the restoration of rights based on certain criteria. For example, if you have a sexually violent felony, I don't care if you ever get your rights back. Sorry. If you murder somebody or rob a bank, I don't care if you ever get your rights back. But if you've got a drug trafficking conviction, even a felony, but it's 10 years old and you've been a productive member of the community, if you've got a moral turpitude offense, which is the crime of lying, cheating, or stealing, but it's 5 years old or 10 years old, and you've been of good standing, you've paid your court costs, there should be a process there. The one thing that really galled me, that really upset me about what Governor McAuliffe did was he attached no criteria to ensure that the victims of the criminals whose rights he restored were made whole. So you might have a criminal holding wherein the judge ordered restitution to the tune of $50,000 to a young woman whose face was slashed from her forehead to her chin, who would carry that scar for the rest of her life. And the individual had made no payments at all towards restitution. McAuliffe restored their rights. So I think there should be something tied to rights restoration saying, where you've hurt a person, where you've stolen property or what have you, and there's restitution ordered, that should be a precursor to the restoration of rights. But certain classes of felony offenses, again, candidly, sexually violent predators, people who prey on children, I'm not terribly concerned with whether they get their voting rights back. I've met people who committed felony offenses in the 70s who started companies that employ 50 people and have sent dozens of kids to college. We shouldn't continue to punish them. So there's some middle ground, I think, to be found. But I do believe that where there is an actual victim, that victim should be made whole before you are reintegrated entirely into society. I also would take exception with individuals convicted of certain offenses having the right to serve on juries, specifically individuals convicted of offenses where they might be a juror in an offense that mirrored that for which they were convicted. So there's another subcategory.
Okay. So it's about 10:05. I think we're going to go for about 10 more minutes or so. I'm going to keep pulling in questions live and hit a couple more from Monday night. About 10 minutes ago, Mark Thompson wrote in, and this is me paraphrasing on the comment thread, what's your plan, or what's your take on overhauling the current tax code?
It's ultimately we do a lot of things wrong. One thing that I think is interesting is that we tax income and not wealth, and so that an individual who is $300,000 in student loan debt because they went to medical school and then became a specialist might in 1 year make $150,000 and pay the same amount of tax as someone who's worth $1 billion who only claims $150,000 in income on the year by virtue of the ability to move assets. So that's counterproductive, and we need to recognize that those two individuals aren't the same, even though their earned income over the course of a year might be the same. The second thing that we do is we've created, as we should, a safety net to ensure that people don't fall through the cracks in this nation, that people have a roof over their heads, the ability to feed themselves and care for themselves. But we've also had ongoing and protracted fights about raising minimum wage. Well, it's not tough economics to understand that when you raise minimum wage, you raise prices and you also reduce the front end opportunity. What I would propose as a counter is that we do not raise minimum wage so that young people, teenagers, who don't have families to support can continue to get jobs, and that we explore ideas like a reverse income tax wherein we treat 28-year-old single fathers of two or single mothers of one differently. That is, to know that a minimum wage standard is not sufficient for them to take care of themselves and that family, but to reward them for working. So the way the reverse income tax would work is we'd say this is the amount of money needed for this individual based on their circumstance. So long as they're working, we'll augment that income to a certain dollar amount. What you learn is that you pay less in augmentation than you do in benefits, and you put more people in the workforce. And if you do it that way, as opposed to artificially pushing up market forces, then you ensure that there are front-end abilities for young people to get that very important first job.
Okay, another question coming in on Monday night. Brianna Brenneman, about 44 minutes in on Monday night, we were talking about, somebody asked about free college tuition. She said she agreed that college is not meant for everyone, four-year colleges that is. We definitely need skilled laborers. No one's saying that we don't, but for those who need college for their dreams, we need to give them the opportunity. So just in relation to free college as well as skilled laborers and the importance of that.
I just wish that I could be in a room. without a clock going next to me to talk to Brianna about this, as opposed to because we have the door open behind me, so there's no glare on the camera, and I'm freezing to death. But I get where she's coming from, and I don't want to be dismissive, but I guess the answer is dependent upon what their dreams are. And what I mean by that is, if my dream is to be the world's greatest sculptor of marble, then it shouldn't be the duty of the taxpayers to ensure that I'm able to fulfill my dream. But if my dream is to work in an industry where there's high demand as a healthcare provider, or as somebody providing mental health services, or as a machinist or a welder, then there might be, in fact, I would be supportive of programs to ensure that we could have tuition assistance and opportunity expansion. But you can't say, okay, your dream is to kite surf around the world, and so here's your kite surfing. And I'm not trying to be mean to Brianna. What we have to do that we failed to do, that the federal student loan paradigm completely misses, is inform young people as to where the needs are when these young people are making the decisions about what they want to do. Now, that's not going to stymie the individual initiative to go out and pursue one's own individual dreams. It won't stop the Picasso from creating the work of art, but what it will do is channel more people into occupations where we know there's a projected need, education and healthcare, hard skilled areas. So I think I can find some common ground with Brianna, depending upon what that person's dreams are. I would just think that we really need to look at what areas we subsidize as it relates to the education field, and know, or at least statistically be pretty darn sure, that there's going to be a demand, so that those investments that we all make together, because that's what government spending is, will pay for themselves.
Okay, probably get about one or two more in here. This one's from Monday night as well, and it had to do with Kay Ferguson wrote in, if you set up high-risk pools, the price will be unaffordable with relation to healthcare. What you're being asked to protect is affordable health care. Even the insurance companies are going to laugh at this idea. This had to do with creating higher risk pools, and it's just another idea.
The insurance companies didn't laugh at the idea. And I got a guy on the other end of the room, who I'm not going to grab and put in front of the camera right now, who sat down and talked with the insurance companies who liked the idea. What we have to do is say we have a public interest in providing care to people in high risk pools, that is pre-existing conditions. You all are the people who provide care plans. We want you to provide a care plan. We're going to make it worth your while by reimbursing you for the cost of providing care of these individuals plus $1, because that's how economics works. And that money's not going to come from the taxpayer to you. It's going to be taken out of what you give to the federal government. Instead of an individual mandate, it's a provider incentive. And literally, we've spoken with insurance companies and people in the industry who say, wow, we never thought of it that way. Now, that might lead to Humana having an effective federal tax rate of 2%, but if it provides care for 10 million people in the high-risk pool, then is that not a good thing? Oftentimes when I speak to young people, say, what if someone cured cancer because they wanted to be a billionaire? And half the young people recoil and go, oh, that's horrible. And I go, did they not cure cancer? So we incentivize the providing of care to individuals with pre-existing conditions and in high-risk pools, and to about 99% overlap, to the people who already provide the plans that give care, by not confiscating as much of the fruits of the labor of the industry that provided that care. We have removed the individual mandate and created a provider incentive. And they didn't laugh when we talked to them about it.
So our last two questions are going to be from people that were either tweeting or commenting on Facebook, disagreeing with us on issues today, and we assured them that we would make sure we touched base on their questions. One or two may be a little redundant, but again, we had assured these people via phone, Twitter, Facebook that we would reach out. So the first one is Ken Fortino. He said during last Facebook Live session, Tom said if he was presented with additional and sufficient evidence of inappropriate relationships with Russia and other foreign entities, he would be willing to break with Republicans and advocate for an investigation of President Trump, and then essentially said the same thing about an investigation into General Flynn. We touched on these issues. I just wanted to hit on them really briefly one more time for any new...
Yeah, no, if anybody's logging on now, then welcome and thank you. I'm supportive. I've learned a lot about what's allegedly happened in the Flynn circumstance in the last 2 days. Here's my understanding. My understanding is there were signals intercepts of communication between General Flynn and members of the Russian government entity, if not the Russian intelligence community, which I would argue are analogous, in which General Flynn allegedly discussed the removal of sanctions following the change of administration. Subsequently, as I understand it, someone came to General Flynn and said, "Did you guys discuss these things with did you discuss these things with the Russians?" General Flynn said, "Of course not." General Flynn then was queried by the Vice President, "Did you discuss these things with the Russians?" He said, "No, I didn't." The Vice President went on the Sunday talk show circuit, said General Flynn didn't discuss these things with the Russians, and I know that because he told me. And then somebody played the tapes for General Flynn and for Vice President Pence, where in fact, allegedly, and I haven't heard them, and if I had, I wouldn't be able to discuss it, even though apparently some people decided it was okay. It contradicted what General Flynn's statements were. Having served in the military for a scant 6 years, 5 years and 9 months, rounding up for having lived in a tent, I know you don't lie to your chain of command. You don't lie to the people who you've taken an oath to protect and defend. So, yes, there should be an investigation into the circumstances surrounding the Flynn situation. There are 3 things we should investigate. This is not redundant. This is triple redundant. We should investigate whether or not General Flynn engaged in activity that he knew he was disallowed from doing. The knowledge is important in the criminal world. We should investigate, if he did, whether he did so under an instruction, and if so, from whom. That's very important. And thirdly, we should investigate the apparent multitudinous leaks at the top secret level in our national security infrastructure, because at some level that's a bigger problem than Mike Flynn telling a lie to Vice President Pence. But that, to my understanding, having received a good deal of information in the last 48 hours, is what happened, and why I have essentially come to the conclusion that an investigation of General Flynn would be appropriate. We continue to look at the circumstances surrounding Russia. I find it really frustrating. There's certainly a lot of allegations of close ties with Russia. As a former military member and someone who understands military capabilities, the recent high-speed flyover of a United States destroyer on Mr. Trump's watch, which mirrors that which occurred on Mr. Obama's watch, is beyond the realm of unacceptable. The defense apparatus that exists on these Navy vessels is such that once those aircraft close within a certain range, they either need to fire or essentially be sitting ducks. And what the Russians are doing is tantamount, I would argue, to something of an act of war, particularly under internationally recognized protocol. So I don't know where that falls into investigating the relations between Trump and Russia, but I would submit that it would be within the realm of self-defense for our Navy to shoot those airplanes out of the sky. Because if the Russians decide to fire first in that scenario, our sailors will be absolutely defenseless. There's no justification for it. No other nation does it. The Chinese snatching our Aqua drone out of the water isn't even close. 2 airplanes flying close to one another isn't even close. This is a circumstance where our U.S. Navy vessels are essentially asked to sit still while someone comes by them at a high rate of speed who could kill them, and to do so inside of a physical distance in which there's nothing they can do about it. It's unacceptable. That needs to end.
And we'll close up with one last question from someone who's been a relatively vocal opponent of most everything we've been doing, that she's been respectful about.
We need to have a town hall where we take questions from supporters. We've completely frozen down all our supporters.
Trying to ensure that everyone knows that this isn't selective questioning. We're trying to pick.
Well, if they haven't figured that out by now, there's not much I can do for them.
This one's from Monica Buckley. Came in during the thread on Monday night, about 38 minutes in. And she cherry-picked the words a little bit out of what was said, but she was elaborating on a quote, and I quote, "an amazingly destructive but absolutely necessary civil rights movement." This was basically just consoling. It was in reference to Congressman Garrett speaking with other representatives around the time that Democrats had taken over both chambers of Congress, I believe, as well as the White House, and for Democrats that are intimidated or worried or something about what's going on right now. And I think you were kind of just going down the line on all the things that this country's overcome and we always end up better for it.
Right. So Monica Buckley, I think, maybe shares a passion of mine, and that is American history and specifically the Civil Rights era. One of my heroes is Barbara Johns. My last act as a member of the Virginia Senate was to submit a bill that would make April 23rd, the day that she led the walkout of the R.R. Moten High School in Prince Edward County, Virginia, a state holiday, so that more young people will learn more about the courage possessed by Barbara Johns. I compare her to Patrick Henry, except Patrick Henry was a 30-some-odd-year-old lawyer. Barbara Johns was a 16-year-old girl. Both of them stood strong for their convictions, potentially at the risk of their own lives, and made America a better place. To say that the civil rights movement, what did I say, amazingly destructive and absolutely necessary? So the promise that was made in the foundational documents, that all people are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that promise was close to a perfect promise. The application of that promise has been so slow in manifesting itself. That document was written when there was slavery. That document was written literally 150 years prior to women gaining suffrage in this nation. The idea was perfect. The practice was so far from perfect. The civil rights movement was amazingly destructive. The Chicago riots, the Watts riots alone, I think adjusted for inflation, cost over $600 million, but that's nothing compared to the 90 human lives that were lost. In the Detroit riots, I believe you had about 1,200 people injured and 40 plus or minus killed. The SPLC cites 37 martyrs during the civil rights movement. What could be more destructive than 4 young girls killed in a church because of their decision to worship and the color of their skin? But it was absolutely necessary to take the other part of that, because we have to continue to work to perfect the promise that is America. We talked earlier in this tape about entitlements of America. I'm a conservative. You won't hear me use the word entitlement a lot. There are two. One is that you're entitled to an opportunity. We should do all we can to make it equal. That's why we're trying to create better schools in impoverished inner city neighborhoods like Petersburg, and we get frustrated when the other side says, oh no, the status quo is fine. But we can look at the numbers and see that the children aren't filling the schools are filling the children. That's why I get frustrated when people say, oh, well, our schools are amongst the best in the nation, we don't need to do anything differently. Well, they are amongst the best for the children for whom they're working. But a lot of the children they aren't working for need to be served better. And interestingly enough, they oftentimes tend to be from challenged socioeconomic backgrounds, racial and ethnic minorities. But I'm going to go to war for them. I'm on the floor of the Virginia Senate saying, can somebody please explain to me why it's a white conservative from Buckingham who's standing up vocally for black kids in Petersburg? And you got to get to know me and know who my heroes are, know what my vision for America is. But ultimately, yeah, it was a terrible time in American history because of the loss of life, the destruction of property, and it was an amazingly important time. I think I called it absolutely necessary time in order to continue working towards perfecting that promise that indeed we live in a society where all people are created equal, and they'll all have that opportunity and that ability to determine for themselves what their success looks like.
So I
thank her for the question, and I admire her. I presume she's coming from the same angle I am, that she's a student of history of the civil rights movement.
So I think that winds it down for tonight. Give everyone time to catch the rest of the UVA Duke game. Former Virginia Tech basketball player myself, and
who won that overtime game the other night?
Double overtime, Virginia Tech Hokies.
All right, guys, I'm cheering for UVA, but I got to give Griffin his moment.
No, so there's no team that I'll be pulling for. There's no way that I would ever pull for Duke over anyone. So go Wahoo tonight. Go Wahoo tonight. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We look forward to getting a schedule out soon with many more town halls in person, online, and everything in between.
Thank you guys immensely for watching, and it's an honor to have the opportunity to serve you. And please, if you got ideas, even if you disagree with us on almost everything, send them in. As is evidence with McCarran Ferguson, which is again a Perriello Markey idea. I will steal your good idea if it makes us all better. So send them in and keep in touch. Thank you.